Hello, welcome to today's program. I'm your host, Davina, and we're talking about the Holocaust and those anti vaxxers who abusively mischaracterize the Holocaust and minimize the outcomes in order to make these absurd comparisons to public health measures uh, undertaken to minimize the death and suffering associated with a pandemic that is still ravaging the globe and that is associated with millions and millions of deaths around the world, as well as hundreds of thousands of children orphaned or who have lost a primary carer because of COVID, to say nothing of the thousands of children who have been hospitalized as a consequence of COVID. So the anti-vaxxers who, whether consciously or unconsciously, are offering up their bodies to as a sacrifice to the god of disinformation. They're driven by a hunger to validate their ego, even when they're playing Russian roulette with their health. Now, what I was able to do today was read an article in The Atlantic by Kurt Anderson, and he described various anthropological studies of human sacrifice over the course of history, and he pointed out that various Republican thought leaders and literal leaders, governors, and various figureheads, Republican-leaning media figureheads and leading thought leaders have offered up this anti-vaccination rhetoric that is a way for people to consolidate their identity as Republicans and as oppositional to public health officials and to scientists and researchers. Hello, Bob. And to people who have been making an effort to help the public avoid personal tragedy, as well as to help our societies collectively minimize not only the personal harms, but also economic harms at a broad level. Because in order to help the economy, you have to find a way to bring a pandemic under control and to reduce the number of deaths, to reduce the strain on hospital systems in order to prevent secondary deaths from occurring. Secondary deaths being the kind of deaths that occur when your hospital beds in your intensive care units are filled to capacity and people die from easily preventable conditions such as kidney stones because they can't get small schedulable surgeries, which another name for is elective surgeries, to occur because of COVID patients, particularly unvaccinated COVID patients, occupying hotel beds. Bob is saying he's noticing a lot of people without masks in the supermarket. I notice more women with toddlers in carts without masks. White suburbanites are the most not wearing masks. Yes. Well, statistically speaking, I think 2/3 of those who've died from COVID are people who whose incomes are fall under the median, which is to say that America's centuries and decades of economic oppression of minority groups, specifically Black Americans, has culminated in Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans bearing greater proportion of the cost of a pandemic where you need access to high quality healthcare in order to survive it. So the proportions of harm have shifted over time because higher amounts of white Republicans and white Republican-leaning independents have constituted that subset of the American population that is firm in its refusal to be vaccinated. So more white people are dying, but at the same time, white people are also disproportionately consuming media that discourages them from wearing masks and acting out on that. So a lot of white people are being irresponsible with regards to mask wearing. And that's possibly because they don't personally know enough people who've been harmed, but a likely reason at this point as well is that white people are more likely to watch Fox News. White people are more likely to consume conservative media, and conservative media is conducting a huge, unethical human sacrifice drive whereby they are exploiting the sickness, suffering, and death of their viewers to erode the success of the Biden-Harris effect on the economy. The improvements undertaken since Donald Trump lost the election and was evicted legally, constitutionally, ethically from the White House. And the economy has developed positively in response to the measures undertaken to stimulate the economy and to vaccinate as many Americans as were willing. And even for those unwilling, mandates were brought in to try and convince people of the necessity of getting vaccinated. So if you wanted to keep your job and you wanted to be able to continue to attend restaurants or certain events, those mandates were helpful in helping people push through their reluctance and in helping the vaccine hesitant to overcome their reluctance, or to at least find reasons for wanting to get vaccinated. Bob says, I equate no mask now with the Trump red hat. I see no mask and I'm pretty sure what political party they belong to. Yes, it's a big giveaway for the media you're likely consuming, because Fox is still, and OAN and Newsmax are all still lying to their viewing population about COVID, and they are minimizing the harm of the pandemic. They're minimizing the deaths. They're minimizing the statistics that very clearly show that people who are boosted, people who at least have 2 doses, are still, in terms of actual numbers, significantly less represented in the hospitalization and death statistics, because the vaccines are very protective against hospitalization and death. So it really hurts me as the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor when I hear those people adopt those terms and call Dr. Fauci Hitler or Dr. Mengele, people who literally either authorized or conducted vicious medical experiments on the Jews and other people whom they had imprisoned in their death camps and their concentration camps, and to equate that with a public health measures around the world where there have been vaccine mandates and a push to help people protect themselves is really quite something. So Robert F. Kennedy issued an apology for having referenced Anne Frank and said at least Anne Frank could hide in an attic. Man, Anne Frank was able to hide, spend years of her life in an attic, and then had a neighbor deliver her family or snitch on her family to the authorities. So she was taken from her hiding spot and placed in a concentration camp where she subsequently died from disease, as the diseases were rampant in and undernourishment and horrid conditions were prevalent in the concentration camp. So if you weren't actively gassed to death, the likelihood of dying from disease was also quite high, and that's what happened to Anne Frank. And for Robert F. Kennedy to abuse that and say people trying not to get vaccinated are equivalent to Anne Frank but have even less options and are suffering more profoundly than Anne Frank, that's a big deal to say to in a world where people can hear you, where people know what actually happened to Anne Frank and how brilliant she was, as evidenced by her writings, and how she died at age 14. And it's hard, because in one way, they understand what we think of them, the right-wing anti-vaxxers, and there are far-left anti-vaxxers as well. There are naturalistic fallacy subscribers on the left who go, I like organic food, and now I'm taking that to the next level to say I'm so resistant to industry and the pharmaceutical industry that I'm going to refuse to put things in my body that aren't made out of organic hay. But the far right people already know that we equate a Trumpian red hat with fascism and with the disrespect for the rule of law, with the tendency to use Hitler Goebbels style propaganda techniques of calling the media all Lügenpresse or fake news. That those are the tactics adopted by Hitler, who was able to use to weaponize pre-existing levels of racism and blind tribalistic loyalty on the part of some Republican voters, and build on that into a massive conflation of patriotism with love for Trump. So you oppose Trump, you hate America. You want America to be honest with itself in its teachings about history. You hate America. You want the role of racism to be discussed in relation to the economic deprivation and persecution of Black Americans, elements of which continue to this very day. Oh, you hate America. You hate Trump because you hate America, and they're all bound together. And that's a very fascist, authoritarian style exploitation of pre-existing levels of racial prejudice and just ignorance of American history and patterns of systematic discrimination within America's foundational systems and its institutions, such as banking institutions, real estate appraising institutions, tertiary education institutions, all over the shop, all things that white Americans need to learn about, but people who mistakenly believe that a stronger America denies its history and doesn't discuss or decides even that it's racist against white people to discuss harms caused by people who happen to be white and happened to severely oppress and legislate against Black Americans. Bob's saying something. It's as if they want the pandemic not to end, or is it they think it's over? They're very keen to think it's over because they've been primed to dismiss the significance of the pandemic. So anybody tells them it's over, they're ready to believe that it's over because they were told from day one already that it was a plot. It was a democratic and media plot to disparage Donald Trump. So people who've heard that over and over again, and Fox News understands the power of repetition. People who've heard over and over again that COVID is not serious and that people are making a big deal about the deaths of some elderly people and that they were going to die anyway, so that COVID hasn't actually even caused any significant harm to anyone. They have been tools of a concerted effort to, first of all, present Donald Trump as the savior of America, the savior of the economy, because he was the only one with the courage to denounce doctors and to denounce researchers and denounce anybody willing to listen to science and say, let's take this pandemic seriously. He lost in part because the contradictions of his two approaches he took to COVID were too blatantly contradictory. That he said, one, COVID is nothing, but then he also said COVID is an attack from China. And it's racist of you to call me racist, or it's part of this conspiracy. Oh, I have to go. But thank you to everybody who's listened, and I look forward to talking to you all again sooner rather than later. Thank you, Bob. I'm glad you were able to have a nice hangout with your grandchildren. Bye.